Heyo, it's your boy here, as the colloquial expression goes. And today I want to discuss something that's absolutely vital to your success. Not just in learning how to, win in social interactions, but in pretty much every area of your life. And what I'm talking about here is having a well-defined purpose. So in my program, Charisma Mastery, purpose is simply one of the 7 principles for developing charismatic expression that you've got to integrate if you want to have continued success on that journey. And each of these principles defines a kind of spectrum of choice potential. So in social interaction, there are many such spectrums or bills of opposites, if you will, that have to be reconciled. For example, there's vertical vibe expansion, where you're just kind of creating a good feeling, but not really moving things along, versus horizontal plot development, where you're starting to kind of move things towards a goal, whether that's closing the deal or getting intimate or going to a different place, etc. So that's one. Another would be energy versus kind of repose. Another would be direct versus indirect, etc., etc. So with purpose, these opposites, on that spectrum, on one hand, you've got aimlessness, and then on the other hand, you have an excessive amount of outcome dependence. However, let me give you a crucial understanding. When we're looking at any opposites, understand that the greatest vitality at any point along a spectrum of energy is through the interaction of the opposites that form that spectrum. So that's one of the things we're going to be touching on this video, among others, like, for example, the distinction between goals and purpose, as well as striving for congruence between your external projective modes of the face, voice, and body, and the internal guidance modes of the intellect, the inner emotional process, and intuition. The guidance modes, and what are the guidance modes? Higher observer, intuition, emotions, intellect. These are the expressive modes, these are the guidance modes. These guidance modes, they depend on the projective modes to be communicated. And they can be congruent or incongruent. Right? What's an example of internal incongruence? You're afraid, but you know you shouldn't be. You ever had that? Approach anxiety, in a nutshell. You're afraid, but you shouldn't be. So again, all these energies come from this greater universal whole. It's beyond our capacity to sense, but it exists regardless. Okay? So again, I don't really want to get into that too much, but we talked about it a little bit earlier. You guys know the author Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi? This guy wrote a book called Flow. It's one of the seminal self-help books. Flow state is access to this. It's where it's starting to flow through you. Okay? A peak performance, which produces a radical shift in the quality of your experience and your performance. Right? When this occurs, when you see this, when it happens to you, your normal limits are transcended. When you see someone doing this, when you watch somebody do this, be in a flow state, you know that you are objectively witnessing an objectively superior performance. Like when you come to the hot seat and you see some of these feats being performed, you're like, wow, what's interesting? He's not really doing anything that different than what I'm doing. But somehow there's this sort of it factor that's causing it to be objectively superior. And I can't access it all the time. And in the hot seat, I also show things where I suck and screw up. It's not just like a big rah-rah session, look how awesome I am. But there are those moments in it. Or when you watch, again, someone who's very, very good at this stuff, and you see them interacting, it just looks like, you can't describe it. We can't describe it, but we can describe the conditions that make it possible. So, if peak experience is to happen in interpersonal communication, number one, it requires a high degree of technical skill, right? High enough so that it requires very little intellectual attention, okay? And by the way, this can be very frightening for people. Why? Having that peak, if you have that peak experience, for some people it's frightening. Why do you think that is? Especially for very logical people.
Self-sabotage?
Yeah, they feel they've lost control. They feel like I'm out of control. Like the intellect's like, I'm not doing this. What's happening? And guess what? They have lost control. If your mind is clinging to this illusion that it should have control of this whole process, then what happens? When that synergistic wisdom takes over, your mind freaks out. Right? Because it seems to lose control. So you have to learn to open yourself to that experience willingly. This is why I always say, when I'm out and I'm hitting on all cylinders, it feels like lucid dreaming. It just feels like I can do anything. Like I can pick up a refrigerator and throw it, and then I fly with a chicken or something. Like literally, that's what it feels like when I'm interacting in field, when I'm in that flow state. I'm like, these people, I went up, and when I first started talking to them, they looked at me like I was a piece of dog shit on their shoe. They're like, oh great, the next idiot. And then I was like, blah, and I made noises come out of my mouth. And I made my face move and looked at them in certain ways. And now they think I'm awesome. It's insane. Or other people are coming in and they have a negative opinion of you, and now they think you're awesome. You know, I get pulled over, and the guy comes up all stern, and then he lets me off. Also, I'm white. It's very helpful. It's called white privilege, okay? So, but you know what I mean? Like, this can help you, not just in this dating realm, but in business, interpersonal communication with your friends and family, random people you meet on the street, authority figures, confrontations with like the neighbor over the tree. Like, again, there's so many applications of this, but again, to access that peak state, you got to learn to open yourself to it freely. So this program intends to prepare your total instrument to open and communicate freely, but also teach you to let go. I want to talk about several principles that are going to guide your process as you go forward. And I think it's important to understand these because, like I said, I think one thing that screws a lot of people up is they start to think of themselves as a product, right? Like, how good is the product? Is the product good enough to present? And that they see that in terms of small goals and small results in the short term, right? So, you guys know who F. Scott Fitzgerald is, right? Yeah. Sound and the Fury, okay? Like a great author in literature. He once said, the sign of real intelligence was the capacity to hold two opposing thoughts in your mind at the same time. Wow. So contrary choices exist at every moment we interact. You can do A or B, right? A or B. But here's the thing. These choices don't need to be held, right? They can rather be accepted as a field of choice potential. Get away from this like dualistic thinking. I think that's one of the big social conditionings that screws you over, is this tendency towards dualistic thinking. Now, in this field of social interaction, we have many, many opposites that you can choose from at any given moment. What are some of those? I talked about one earlier. Vertical idea expansion versus horizontal plot development, right? So when you're when you're talking to someone, you're vibing, right? You're just vibing. You guys know what vibing is? We spoke about this before. What's vibing?
Flow. Chemistry. Feeling.
Vibing in terms of like, it's basically it's just a conversation. If you're vibing with someone, you're having a conversation that it's not going anywhere. It's a non-goal oriented conversation that's designed to do one thing and one thing only. Pump emotional state. That's it. Pumps emotional state. So to that end, I'll just free associate with things they say to me. You know, free associate. Oh, that's interesting. I have an anecdote about that. Like, what do I say? What do I say? I'm just vibing. It's largely unimportant. Now, what you say becomes important when you're trying to talk about horizontal action development, right? So if I want to start moving it forward, either towards closing the deal or resolving the conflict or getting intimate, going home, now I need to start thinking about horizontal plot development. Okay, so that's one idea. Then you have reason versus emotion. What's another one? Memorization, invisible threads, versus improvisation, letting go. External focus versus internal focus. Look, communication is ostensibly this external act, but it's got to come from within. Right? So in order to make it seem organic, these need to interrelate, right? And provide modifying feedback to each other. You have to exercise the skills of that inner-outer relationship. How about another one? Self-confidence versus self-analysis. Seriousness versus playfulness. Discipline versus freedom. Carefulness versus recklessness. Repose versus energy. What am I versus what can I become? So when you're looking at these opposite ideas, understand that, I guess, the greatest vitality at any point along a spectrum of energy is through the interaction of the opposites that form that spectrum. So, getting a little deeper with this, rise above it. Try not to cling to these like dualistic oppositions, right? So I read another book recently by this guy E.F. Schumacher called A Guide for the Perplexed. And in this book, he discusses a confusion where all problems are thought of as problems to be solved, right? A problem must be solved. So there's two kinds of problems. There's convergent and divergent problems. So with a convergent problem, there's a single answer to it, right? 2 plus 2 is 4, right? That's a convergent problem. Divergent problems yield contradictory answers, and the more that they're logically analyzed and studied, the more the answers diverge. So in dating, what would be an example of a divergent problem?
Text.
Text?
Yeah. Then you can send it.
Like what to do, yeah. Or I guess probably one of the most fundamental ones that we encounter is this direct or indirect. Do I go direct and show intent right off the bat? Or do I go indirect and try to go under the radar? Now, both of these are correct from their partial point of view. But if you take these to their logical extreme, they become useless. There's a vast range of choices that you have between what that mouth do and do nothing. Okay? So some of those answers you might prefer, but there's no correct final answer. So some people, you'll note, they manage this polarity of direct indirect. They manage it with a minimum of intellectual effort. You know, they're not really thinking about it. They both show intent, and they're also nonchalant about it. They don't put pressure on them. Like they show intent, but it's also very meh. Again, Max used to call this the hot guy blase. You'll note all good guys actually have this. They move things forward, but they also seem like kind of meh. Like they could leave at any moment and not even care. Right? They have a synthesis, they blend it. So opening to this kind of higher energy principle of it's not A or B, Owen would call this thinking in nuance and gray areas. Opening to the idea of that allows us to transcend, integrate, and draw fully on the potential synergy of the lower parts. So what I want to talk here about now is like these, again, a series of opposites that are going to form principles for charismatic expression. And coincidentally, they all begin with the letter P. Okay? Yay! So each of these defines a spectrum of choice potential. So the first principle here is our purpose. Now this is this is probably the most important one. So on the ends of the spectrum of purpose, at one end you have 0 goals, aimless. On the other end, you have this overly intense focus on partial goals that can distract from the path towards integration and wholeness. So what are we talking about here with regard to our process of learning this stuff? It's the same thing. If you're looking at these partial goals and you're not looking at the end goal, it can become a problem. So for example, what would a real life example of this be? Like yo-yo dieting. You know, you're here, you start to get fat, you do this extreme diet, and yeah, you lose the weight, but then it's too much to handle, and then you go off it. You're like, this shit sucks. I can't like eat lettuce all day. Donuts, binge donuts on the first opportunity, and then it's just like this constant back and forth, right? So as we go out and we practice meeting people and interacting with them, you might berate yourself for the mistakes. So you stop enjoying the process, and then what happens? You don't go out. You don't go out. Or you become too results oriented and you focus on like a goal, like one specific goal, right? Like say I want to hook up with this particular person, or I want to like hook up with this, like some number or some arbitrary goal that distracts you from the larger goal of what? Developing a more powerful, integrated, charismatic personality over the long term. So when we don't get that goal, the correction is to stop practicing. Or be even more judgmental on yourself when you're out practicing. Like, fucking sucked. And then what happens? Or even worse, or maybe not worse, but equally bad, you make someone else force you to practice. Like, force me. Which happens what? Like leading you further and further away from the original purpose. So I think it's important here to determine the difference between purpose and goals. Okay? Purpose and goals, there's a big difference here. The higher energy principle of purpose does what? It reminds you that you're not a product or a goal, right? You're a process. Purpose is sort of a continuing sense of direction rather than a goal along the path, and it guides us from a larger perspective. So what are some examples of goals? Getting a better job.
Making $1 million bucks.
Yeah, making money.
Losing weight.
Getting laid. Losing weight. Right? Making new friends. If these things are mistaken for purpose, it can seriously interfere with your overall process, okay? The thing about goals is this. Once you achieve them, what happens? Now what? Eckhart Tolle, y'all guys don't know Eckhart, good old Eckie. Yeah, he said this. He's like, there's two ways to go insane. The first is to not have what you want. The second is to get what you want. Which is weird, right? Because like when you don't have what you want, at least there's hope. You're like, oh yeah, one day when I get the result, when I get the mile high club or whatever like obtuse goal you might have, then I'll be happy. What happens when you get all the goals and you're still the same person? Now you're fucked, because now you don't even have hope, right? So the point is, again, be happy from where you are, and then these goals are extra. And the purpose is overarching. Purpose is individual. My purpose is not getting more money at this point. It's not getting more, romantic partners. My purpose is quite simple. It's to understand more clearly and in greater depth how this whole human energy system functions, and to explore the capacity of that system for the fullest, most whole kind of charismatic expression and social interaction, and in doing so, come to a better knowledge and understanding of myself. So in that context, every boot camp I do, every one of these seminars that I run, every student, regardless of their skill level, good or bad, every interaction I have when I'm out there meeting people, no matter the outcome of that, is an opportunity to fulfill that purpose. So, as I said before, the purposes of this program that I've developed are, number one, to open and sustain charismatic expression with increasing consistency. Number two, to fulfill your expressive potential. And then finally, create exercise process to serve as a vehicle for that journey. Okay? And that trio of purposes will fulfill many goals along the way. And you can choose to focus on any of those little goals that you have along the way as a supplemental purpose, right? But the thing is, you got to choose for yourself. Purpose is personal. I can't choose it for you. It's not on me to impose my purpose on you. But again, following this program, these exercises, it'll serve a wide variety of practical goals. This program is designed to give you a process to open and sustain charismatic expression with increasing consistency. Remove the obstacles, isolate the skills, exercise them separately, then put them together in a more completely realized whole. How to speak to all the issues surrounding this interrelationship between intuitive and intellectual resources is arguably the most fundamental challenge facing anyone who's attempting to improve their communication skills.
So if you're looking to develop general charisma that you can apply across all areas of life, definitely check out Jeff's Charisma Mastery.